The trade deadline is past and an era comes to a long anticipated end. Marvin Bagley is on his way to Detroit. The Kings' number 2 overall pick in 2018, that disaster they can finally put behind them. And while I wish Marvin Bagley the best of luck, it's going to be tough for Sacramento to live that historically bad move down. The good news is they turned Marvin Bagley into 3 players, one of which this Kings team has been pursuing since a couple off seasons ago in a Bogdanovich sign and trade. I'm talking about Donte DiVincenzo. We'll talk about that move, the trade deadline for the Kings as a whole, plus Domantas Sabonis and Darren Fox shined together. The Golden One Center was revived in a Kings win. They're 1-0 in the Fox and the Ox era. We'll talk about that, and you'll hear from Domantas Sabonis and the new Kings on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's trade deadline episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento sports media member for the last 7 years. This is my 8th season covering Kings basketball, formerly for Sacramento Sports Talk Radio, now with ABC 10 News and Television here in the California capital. And happy trade deadline day, everybody. Boy, was it a fun and chaotic day, from a Ben Simmons trade finally going down. The Philadelphia 76ers trading Ben Simmons in a package for James Harden. We had other weird moves all over the league, like Kristaps Porzingis being traded from Dallas to the Washington Wizards. The Indiana Pacers made yet another move, and what I thought was a very successful trade deadline for them. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the acquisition of Tyrese Halliburton. But then the Kings, they snuck their way in earlier in the day, finally completing a long-anticipated, long-rumored Marvin Bagley trade to the Detroit Pistons. However, it was a lot busier than just that. The Kings, as part of a 4-team deal, send Marvin to Detroit. And I spoke with Locked On Pistons host Ku Cahill multiple times about the possibility of Bagley in Detroit, what he can be for the Pistons. He is heading to the Motor City, and the Kings are getting back a couple pieces from the Pistons, both Trey Lyles and Josh Jackson. You may recognize that Josh Jackson name. He was picked number 4 overall by the Phoenix Suns, the pick before Darren Fox, who was taken by the Kings at 5 in the 2017 draft. His career has not lived up to that number 4 overall pick. He's kind of bounced around a little bit, but he might have potential to turn into a little bit something here in Sacramento. Adds a little bit of wing depth and shooting guard depth if he wants to play big for the Kings. So that's an interesting note. But the main piece that the Kings get back in this deal comes from the Milwaukee Bucks. That's Donte DiVincenzo, the 3-and-D type player, mainly known for his defensive aggression. And he is someone who Monty Mcnair has had on his radar since coming to Sacramento. His first offseason, remember, Bogdanovich was supposed to be traded to the Milwaukee Bucks in a sign and trade for Donte DiVincenzo. That deal fell apart. There was a tampering violation, mainly by the Milwaukee Bucks. The Kings didn't receive any penalty for that. But ultimately, that move that would have been a great move for the Kings, not losing Bogdanovich for nothing, that deal fell apart. Well, here we are a season and a half or so later, and the Kings finally got their guy. Donte DiVincenzo is finally a King. Of course, he's coming with a ring, a championship culture from Milwaukee, and he is a guy that absolutely can help this Kings team, can definitely add depth. I don't know if the Kings plan to use him as a starter. My gut reaction is a bit of doubt with that, although the Kings could play small and play Donte DiVincenzo at the 3, Harrison Barnes at the 4, with Domantas Sabonis at the 5. That is a possibility. We'll have to see. Alvin Alvin Gentry has some decisions to make and some things to figure out with this roster before Wednesday's game, or rather Saturday's game, against the Washington Wizards, who have also made some trades and some deals themselves. So two new look teams going at it on Saturday. That should be interesting, and we'll see what lineup that the Kings put together. But I do want to talk a little bit, of course, about Marvin Bagley, because this is the end of an era that began with so much hope, with so much optimism. Marvin Bagley's first ever game as a Sacramento King was the California Classic. His first ever basket as a King was dunking over Wagner and against the LA Lakers and absolutely exploding the Golden One Center. The number 2 overall pick, a pick that the Kings had no business having, that they got lucky in and by getting, had the option of Bagley, of Trae Young, of Luka Doncic, of course, of Jaren Jackson Jr. And in the end, it will go down as one of the biggest blunders, not just in Sacramento Kings history, but maybe one of the biggest draft blunders in NBA history, period. And while Marvin Bagley, I do still believe, has a chance to have a successful NBA career, that will always be a massive bust. But that bust belongs to former Kings general manager Vlade Divac and not current Kings general manager Monty Mcnair, who is now, in my opinion, completely shed the skin of Vlade. He is over Vlade's moves. He has moved past the Vlade Divac era. This is now 100% Monty McNair's team. And if we could all just give a round of applause for the trade deadline that Monty McNair put together, even if before these moves were made, I said here, and I stand by what I said, that I disagree with the move of the Kings going for the play-in and the playoffs this year. Even with that mindset and that opinion, I still can recognize that Monty McNair made this Kings team better immensely. Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley are gone. The two pieces the Kings needed to move the most, they're gone. The Kings have gotten rid of players who didn't want to be here. They also got rid of a young potential star who did want to be here. And Tyrese Halliburton spoke with Indiana media today, and he had kind of some tough things for Kings fans to hear. Didn't take shots at the Kings organization by any means, but you can tell that he takes this a little bit personally. And I'll share with you some of the things that he said later on in the pod. But Monty McNair, he put his money where his mouth was. He didn't sit on his hands. He's been twiddling his thumbs for the majority of his time here in Sacramento, and finally he made his move, and he made some big ones. Now, he could have made another big one and maybe tried to make, I imagine he tried to make a third and final big move right before the deadline ended with Richaun Holmes. But as the deadline has passed and no move was made, Richaun is still a Sacramento King. So what does that mean for Richaun Holmes? What does that mean for the Kings? Is that a disappointment? Is that a failure by Monty McNair? Absolutely not. It is not a bad thing in the slightest for Richaun Holmes to still be a Sacramento King. This is year 1 of his new 4-year contract that he signed just this past offseason with the Kings. And this contract is still very favorable. It's a great deal. And Richaun still has a whole lot to offer, even if he's had a bit of a down season, mostly because the poor guy keeps getting hit in the face and in the eye time and time again, which, of course, Domantas Sabonis got elbowed in the eye in his Kings debut last night. What in the world is going on with Kings bigs getting hit in the face? But regardless, Richaun Holmes is still a King. So what does that mean going forward? Well, Richaun quickly became the Kings starting center when Vlade Divac signed him a couple of years ago, 3 seasons ago now. That spot, I don't think is his any longer. We saw Richaun come off the bench and Domantas Sabonis start at the 5 along with some floor spacers. Chimezie Metu started at the 4, Harrison Barnes at the 3, and then Darren Fox and Justin Holiday at the 1 and the 2. I don't know if that's going to be the absolute Kings starting 5 going forward, even though Chimezie Metu had a very good game and really enjoyed playing with Domantas Sabonis, clearly. But Richaun coming off the bench is potentially really, really good for Sacramento. I mean, he provides that hustle, that energy, that intensity, that effort. And I imagine Rashawn's not happy by the prospect of becoming a bench player, especially after signing the contract. But the good news is he got his bag. He's getting money. He's getting his money. He's getting paid already. So he doesn't have to worry about that too much. But Richaun Holmes' potential as a bench energy hustle guy who can come in, have an immediate impact, can fill up a stat sheet, can boost the second unit when the starters need to pick me up, because believe me, that will happen at some point for the remainder of this season. I like that possibility. I like that idea. As long as Rashawn buys into it, which is based off of his personality, I'm not too concerned about that. I believe Rashawn will buy in. And there's still plenty of potential for the Kings to move on from Rashawn this offseason. In fact, I would say moving on from Rashawn this offseason is a likelihood. His contract gets a little bit better in the sense that there's one less year on it, even though I think a lot of teams would like Rashawn's contract and the value of it the way it is right now. You could use Richaun Holmes and your draft pick to make a big swing maybe this offseason. You could use Richaun Holmes and your draft pick to maybe move up in the draft. Rashawn is a piece that is going to have value. Just because you didn't move him at the deadline doesn't mean that he's losing his value or his value is even going to go down. Teams recognize the value of Richaun Holmes. It just appears that the Kings weren't able to get the deal done or a deal done that they were looking for at this deadline in particular. But again, I don't feel that Richaun Holmes being traded is a bad thing whatsoever. Him still being on this team now with the addition of DiVincenzo, of Josh Jackson, of Trey Lyles, who I don't expect to have that big of a role, but we'll have to wait and see. And then, of course, Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday, and Domantas Sabonis. Like, big change to this roster. Now, the Kings also have to clear up some roster spots. And as of right now, the time of recording this, I haven't seen any announcement of who is getting cut and who is going up. And I just got it right here. The Kings have notified Jahmi'us Ramsey and Robert Woodard that they will be waived as part of today's transaction. So unfortunately, that's how it works. If you're an end of the roster guy, end of the bench guy, trade deadline can mean you're out of a job. And it's a tough pill to swallow for both those guys. I hope they're able to land on their feet in the G League or the NBA somewhere. But it's the way things goes. But overall, this roster is much improved. And they need to be much improved because this Kings team has got some work to do. There is the potential for long-term success with this Kings team, but there also needs to be some short-term success to get that long-term started. Thankfully, we did get some short-term success in an incredibly fun Kings win last night in the Golden One Center over the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'll tell you about that move or that game, talk to you about the best moments of that game, why I was happy and smiling watching Kings basketball again, the beginning of the Fox and the Ox era. That's all coming up here in just a second. Before that, though, I'll tell you a little bit more about Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. As football, we get closer and closer. We're now days, hours away from the big game happening on Sunday. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just football, of course. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL boxing, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. Bet online, where the game starts. Let's get this out of the way. I know it's just one game and it's a small sample size, but Kings fans, it is okay to enjoy something good when it's in front of you, even if the prospect of tomorrow is not as exciting or could be bleak. Like, no one is watching what the Kings and this new core did last night and saying, wow, this team is so much better. They're guaranteed to make the playoffs, championship contender in a couple years. While our elated reactions in the moment may seem that way, we all understand what reality is with this group. That being said, it's okay. It's needed. It's therapeutic for us all to enjoy what the Sacramento Kings did last night in a game that, quite frankly, got off to a really crappy start. It got off to a good start for Chimezie Metu. He looked really good in the first quarter, but the Kings defense didn't. They were outscored by the Timberwolves 37-29. Thankfully, they put together a 42-27 second quarter to get themselves back into the game and give themselves a lead. And truth be told, while the starters are certainly to be praised for this win, like Harrison Barnes dropping a 30-point performance on the same day that we heard reports that the Kings were hanging on to him, that's a damn good reason to hold on to him right there. Not that we can expect 30 points from Harrison on a nightly basis for the remainder of the season, but he fits really well with what the Kings are trying to do with this Fox and Sabonis pairing. Speaking of the two of them, Darren Fox had 27 points on 10 of 20 shooting, 2 of 4 from three-point range, 5 of 5. Love to see that from the free throw line. Domantas Sabonis in his Kings debut, 22 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists, did turn the ball over 4 times, but we can ignore that stat at least for a night. Shot 10 of 19, over 50% from the field. You had Chimezie Metu with his solid game with 13 points. Justin Holiday played 30 minutes, just had 6 points, 2 of 11 shooting. Not the best shooting night for him, but I really like what he brings for the Kings. The starters were good, very good, especially for the first time starting all together. 2 of those 5 guys being brand new to the roster, not even practiced yet. But off the bench, Davion Mitchell continued to shine, and he's been very, very good recently starting. He brought that energy off the bench with 18 points on 7 of 12 shooting, 3 of 6 from three-point range. He is fast, man. I didn't realize Davion Mitchell was as fast as he is. He's getting up and down in transition just as quick, or, well, maybe not just as quick, but only a little bit slower than De'Aaron Fox is. So if Davion Mitchell's playing with that energy, love the idea of him as a starter or a bench player. Although I understand why the Kings decided to bring him off the bench and have Justin Holiday start at the 2. Don't know if that's going to be the long-term choice, but I understand why they did it. And then in addition to that, Jeremy Lamb with a solid debut. He finished with 14 points, 4 of 11 shooting. Also had some good defensive moments as well. The new guys did great. And more importantly, the Kings won the game. Very entertaining fourth quarter in particular. The Kings went on a 10-0 run at one point in the fourth quarter where they were getting out in transition, getting defensive stops. Sabonis was scoring in the post. You had connections between Fox and Sabonis. De'Aaron Fox also finished in this game with only 3 assists, so that's a number that needs to come up. Certainly a drop-off from the Tyrese Halliburton numbers that we're used to at that guard spot, of course. But the two of them were connecting, playing well together. There was an awesome moment of a high five between the two after Domantas Sabonis was fouled, following a nice entry pass by Fox to Sabonis in the post. The Kings were getting out in transition. Fox looked young, youthful, excited. He looked like he did as a rookie. He looked like he did in the 2018 season when the Kings were getting out in transition all the time. He looked re-energized. He looked refreshed by the fact that not only is he playing with a star, he's playing with a big that complements him maybe for the first time in his career, a big that also sets good screens. And we saw that on full display in this game. Like everything about that fourth quarter was so therapeutic, so needed. And I'm not just talking about for the Golden One Center, and that crowd was not full by any means, but that crowd was loud. I wasn't there. I could hear it through my television at home, though. That crowd was loud and engaged, and it's the first time maybe since the home opener against the Jazz that the crowd has been like that. But for me, as someone who has come on the Locked On Kings podcast time and time again this season and told you this is my least favorite Kings team of all time, I needed this because I have been dreading watching Kings basketball for the last month and a half. So to sit down, watch a Kings game and have fun and smile and see a future, see potential beyond just Tyrese Halliburton, Davion Mitchell, and maybe De'Aaron Fox. That was very exciting to me, very encouraging for me. Now, again, I know it's just one game. It's a small sample size, but that hug between Sabonis and Fox after the game, where it looks like Fox is hugging Sabonis with his eyes closed like Sabonis is an answered prayer, and maybe he is for De'Aaron. But that moment, I think, suggests something new, something refreshing, something different. Because at no point during this 15-year playoff drought have the Kings done this, traded for a multi-time, 2-time All-Star. Never have the Kings done that. They did it. They took a swing. And at least for one night, it got off to a phenomenal start. Imagine the alternative. Imagine the opposite. Imagine the Kings got blown out by the Timberwolves and Fox and Sabonis looked terrible together. The new guys look terrible. Well, we could easily come here on the podcast the next day and make the excuse of these guys haven't played together yet. Sabonis and the Pacers just landed in Sacramento the night before, and all they've had is a little pregame shoot around together. But there would be reactions like, oh my God, the Kings are idiots. They're horrible. The majority of the reactions that I saw from both national media and many here in Sacramento after the Kings traded Halliburton for Sabonis was, what in the hell are the Kings doing? So if you're going to be like that, if things aren't going right, allow yourself to enjoy when things do go right. And things went right. It got off to as close to as good of a start as you could ask for in game one of the Fox and the Ox era here in Sacramento. And there was even encouraging things said by Sabonis after the game that makes the fear of losing Sabonis in a couple of years to free agency, it makes it a little more manageable. I'll share with you some of Sabonis's comments coming up here in the next segment. I do also want to make sure I touch on Tyrese Halliburton and the things that he said to the Indiana Pacers media earlier today. Nothing surprised me, but yeah, it was hard to listen to as someone who appreciates Tyrese, who likes Tyrese a lot. Tyrese was asked multiple times in kind of interesting ways. The Indiana Pacers media was definitely trying to push a narrative of, man, the Kings blindsided you and they're the villains. They screwed you, not necessarily screwed you over, but they're mean for what they did to you. And I get it. They're trying to push a narrative and they're excited that he's there, whatever. But Tyrese said a couple of things that strike the heartstrings a little bit. Number one is he said, quote, they ain't want me, saying the Kings didn't want me, basically, which we know that's not true, but they needed to make a move and he was the guy that was on the chopping block. And then he said that it hurt him when he got traded. We heard reports, I think Matt Barnes on television said that Tyrese was crying, had tears in his eyes when he found out he was traded. Doesn't surprise me at all because Tyrese had bought into what the Kings were trying to do. He was committed to being here in Sacramento. He had no expectation of being traded, just like we had no expectation that he was going to be traded. He liked the community. He was an active part of the community, going to high school football games and supporting small businesses. Like Tyrese fit Sacramento well, and Kings fans embraced him because of that. But he was also on a losing bad team. And the biggest praise that I can give Tyrese, other than the fact that he's a phenomenal human being, a very well-spoken young man, and a basketball player with star potential in the NBA, Tyrese Halliburton got the Kings a multi-time All-Star. Because the Kings took Tyrese Halliburton 12, which you could argue Tyrese fell to them, doesn't matter. The Kings took Tyrese Halliburton 12. Because they took Tyrese 12, they were able to trade him for an All-Star that this team has not been able to acquire in over a decade. That should be one of the biggest compliments that I could give Tyrese. And I know he's going to take it personally. And I expect him to go right at the Kings when they play in March. And I expect him to end up having a phenomenal career and to do things that make Kings fans cringe on a nightly basis. It's part of the business. Wish him the absolute best. But we could already see the difference, especially for Darren Fox, in just one game last night. All right, let's hear from Domantas Sabonis. I'll play that audio for you right after I tell you about rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why would you endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter just orders the parts on their computer, choosing only the brand their warehouse happens to carry? They take you out of it. You have no power. You have computers, though, with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So use rockauto.com. Save time and money. Why would you choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer. They have every everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. You can go and explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, and be sure to write Locked On in there "How did you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Following the game, Domantas Sabonis, Jeremy Lamb, and Justin Holiday all took the podium together in sort of an impromptu introductory post-game press conference, and even Monty McNair stepped out and said a few words. Not like we're expecting to have an actual press conference from McNair at some point, but he said a few words to the Kings media before the three of them spoke. Don't have that recorded, but I do have some clips from what Domantas Sabonis said that I think you'd be interested in hearing. So here it is. New Sacramento King Domantas Sabonis with a big smile on his face after a very successful Kings debut.
Hey, everybody. I think speaking for all of us, it's been a crazy 36 hours since we found out, traveling this morning, MRIs, getting our blood taken, and then till the last second, I think it was like 10 minutes before 6 p.m. where we knew we could play today, and then we just had to come out and go out there and have fun. I feel like this is a fresh start for me. It's going to be exciting. We want to be here. I want to be here. The fans were amazing tonight. It's just, I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm in shock. Today was a great day. I'm so happy they're here with me because we were talking about it on the way here. We're like, thank God it's all three of us and not just one of us. And they're great. He's really funny. He's really funny his own way. He's a hard worker. He's just a goofy guy, and I'm just happy they're here with me.
They brought you here to pair you with a guy like Darren Fox. I just wonder what your thoughts are about playing with him and what kind of interaction you guys have had so far.
He's been great. He's been very welcoming since the beginning, and I feel like we're working on our chemistry. It showed today a little bit, and I'm excited. He suits me a lot. I suit him a lot. So every game is just going to get easier and easier. So I'm really excited for this. Since the second I made it to the NBA, I figured out the hard way. This is a business. That I got traded on draft night. Then a year later, I got traded again, and just trying to find a home, where I'm loved. I want to come out and compete every day, and I feel like I found it here. I love it here, and I just want to keep playing and getting wins.
Maybe that made you feel better. I don't know. Let me know what you think about Sabonis, the way he played, your thoughts on the Marvin Bagley trade, your thoughts on the Kings' future. If you're excited about it, still frustrated about it, your thoughts on Richaun Holmes not being moved. Share all of your thoughts, your opinions, your feelings with me. Please do that on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts down in the YouTube comment section down below. The support in recent episodes has been just off the charts. I'm so thankful for that. I know we have a lot of tons of new Locked On Kings listeners, so welcome. I love you. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you will stick around. Feel free to leave a review of the Locked On Kings podcast if you haven't already. Best place to do that is Apple Podcasts or iTunes. Hit 5 stars. There's a little box for you to leave a custom review, why you like the podcast, any constructive criticism that you might have, why you would encourage others to listen to the Locked On Kings podcast. That helps us out a ton, so please find the time to do that if you could. If you're listening on Spotify, it's really quick. There's no custom review system. It's just 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. Give the show the rating that you think it deserves. Hopefully it is 5 stars. And then if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. That would make a massive difference for us here. And I appreciate all of you who are doing that. We're approaching 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is crazy to think that we just launched the night of the NBA draft last summer and already are having that kind of success. It all has to do with you. Really has nothing to do with me. It's just the Kings fandom further proving why they are some of the, if not the greatest fans in the NBA. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.